Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
I want to start with asking for a definition, and then I will ask more questions. So, what is juxtaposition?
Probably best to give it as a description rather than a definition.
Yeah.
But juxtaposition meaning the contrast between what the child needed but never had in terms of quality of a meaningful relationship and what the therapist provides, which is often an attuned response to those relational needs of the client. Now, one would think that if a client grew up in a family where they were never listened to, that the therapist, acute, sensitive listening would be satisfying. But a juxtaposition is the client pushing the therapist away, discounting what the therapist is doing, minimizing the impact because it stirs up the old emotional memories of those relational needs not being satisfied.
Mhm.
That's juxtaposition.
Mhm.
Now, when I wrote about it, I didn't just use the word juxtaposition. I referred to juxtaposition reaction. Now, I learned about this intensely from working with borderline clients who would repeatedly describe what was missing in their family.
Yeah.
And if I responded with that uh, too much too soon, they would change the subject. They would distract in some way. And then I learned that my attentiveness, my compassion, my interest, my sensitivity was such a contrast
Mhm.
to what they had grown up with that they could not tolerate what I was offering. And this is very typical of what I call early affect confusion or borderlines. And I wrote about that extensively in the book, Early Affect Confusion.
Yes. Yeah. So, this process can happen early in the treatment or in the middle, or when actually the
It
script
could
is
happen.
challenged.
It could happen the first session. Maybe it even happens. I remember once wondering if it had happened in the phone call where somebody made a call to make an appointment. I listened to her story quite empathetically, and she never showed up. Is it possible that I was
Yes.
too empathetic in that phone call while she was telling me how awful her previous therapist had been?
Yeah, and I wonder how you actually predict based on the script of the person or how you understand it, because there is always like this balance, attunement with the script and not being too much or too soon or too early. And at the same
Okay.
time, you want to provide a corrective experience. Like,
That's the artistry. Often what I do is I just think about the concept of juxtaposition, reaction, and I pull back. I get a little more bland.
mm,
Uh, Sometimes I'll turn it into a relational inquiry. The relational inquiry is an inquiry about you and me and how are you affected by my behavior.
yeah.
All right. So I will say to them, I notice I said something to you rather tenderly, and you turned and looked out the window and you were silent, and then you changed the subject. What happens to you and what happens to our relationship when I say something tenderly? So I try to bring it into the moment. And then my client says to me, well, as soon as you're tender, I don't trust you. I wonder what you're after. And I said,
Yes.
so is it better if I'm not tender? Well, I like it, but I don't trust it. So let's talk about who's you didn't trust.
Mm.
So I use that relational inquiry to describe between us, but also who originated.
Yeah. It reminded me of when you mentioned the early affect confusion, and in your book, there is a part you uh, write about the borderline between rage and despair. So,
Hmm.
there are cases that the person can get really angry at you, but at the same time wanting something that probably is uh, more attuned to the relational needs. But when you provide that, the person experience rage towards you or maybe attacks.
Yeah, yeah. I remember as a kid having fun. There was a long fence in our neighborhood that had a board about that wide on the top, and we would get up there and walk that board, that long fence, and there was always a risk of falling this side or this
Okay.
side. And that's what the borderline client lives with
Mm,
between those two polarities. You
mm.
know, they could fall to the right, they could fall to the left, or they could fall right down the middle.
Yeah,
And
and that puts the therapist also in a tightrope that
yeah, yeah,
between these two.
yeah. Except I think we understand it, we know it, we can calculate for it. So one of the things I do is I might back off on the intensity of my attunement, or not the attunement itself, but the expression of that attunement.
Okay. And
Thank
one
you.
of the
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it also reminded me of something you said in your one of latest interviews. So someone asked you whether you're too soft, and you responded, I might not know what too soft is, but I know too hard what too hard is. And uh, so what I take now from this conversation is that so when you face that juxtaposition, you go back a little bit and reduce
Yes, I
your
guess I do know what too soft is in the case of some people. But if I'm going to make an error, I'd rather make an error on being too soft than being too hard.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.